Welcome to the last part of our loops example videos. For this example, I'm going to actually create a loop that runs sort of like a timer because it's only going to repeat its code after a certain amount of time has run. So let's read over this question. I'm going to create a Windows Form project called loop example 3, and it's going to have a loop that counts a label only once per second. I have the code already written up in my notes, so you can grab that from the course website if you'd like, but I'd also like to program it together and explain what we're doing as it's happening. So I'm going to create a new project here. Windows Forms application. Make sure it's on your USB key, please. And I'm going to call it loop example 3. So this one's going to have a couple of labels again, just like our previous examples. Going to have label 1, label 2. I'm going to change the text for label 1 to say click here to start the timer. And I'm going to scroll up, change the name of my label to be LBL start. And my other label will be called LBL count. And I'm going to change the text to just be the number 0. Okay, and so now I'd like to program this LBL start label so that when I click on it, it will start counting. So the setup for this code is a fair bit more complicated than the previous two examples. What I'd like to do with my timer is actually use that environment.tickCount command which we talked about previously. So this environment.tickCount is a built-in variable that gets the time on the computer in milliseconds. Okay? So what I'd like to do is I'd like to use that variable, and I'd like to actually create my own variables that sort of keeps track of when the last time it was that the computers or that my loop has run. And so I'm going to create a variable here, store the previous time that the loop has run. It's documenting my variable, and I'm going to call it int data type is int, and the variable is going to be called previous time run. When my program first starts up, I'm going to get the time of my program for my program. So I'm going to set previous time run equals, and here is our built-in variable environment.tickCount. So I'm going to document this as get the program's start time. When I click on my label, what I'd like to do is create my loop. I'm going to create something called an infinite loop here. An infinite loop is a loop whose Boolean expression, or the loop condition, is always true. Infinite sort of means that it never ends. This is a loop that never ends. The only way that it's going to stop is if I actually physically sort of stop the program with my with my stop button. And then later on, I'm going to change it so that it's not quite an infinite loop. So here's my while, and I'm just going to write the keyword true. So that might look a bit strange to you as a Boolean expression, but this is it's a Boolean statement. It's always true. Since it's always true, this loop will never exit. The internals of this loop is a little bit more complicated than what we've done before. What I'd like to do is I'd like to get the current time of my program. So when this loop runs, and it's going to be repeating over and over, every single time it repeats, I'm going to get the current time. I'm going to calculate the difference between the current time and the previous time that the loop has run. And so here is a new variable, int time difference equals current time minus previous time run. Okay. Now if the time difference is big enough, in our example, my time difference is going to be 1 second, I'd like to count up in my label. Okay, so remember that the environment.tickCount runs in milliseconds. Now if you remember back from our timer lessons, you'll remember that there are 1,000 milliseconds in each second. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to write an if statement inside my while loop. So that's nesting, right? So I'm writing an if code block inside my while code block. If time difference is greater than or equal to 1,000, so if 1 second has passed, count up my label. Okay, so now inside of this if statement, I'm going to actually write the stuff that I want to happen in my label. If I want to be counting up, I got to add a counter variable. So int counter. I'm going to start it off at 0. So if time difference is greater than or equal to 1,000, I'm going to say LBL counter equals counter plus 1, count up, and then I'm going to show it in my label. LBL count dot text equals counter dot toString. In addition, I need to update the previous time run. So I'm going to write previous time run equals environment.tickCount. So I'm going to get the time again. Okay? Seems a bit strange, but I'll be going over it shortly with a little graph. So here when I run my code, hopefully it works. Click here to start the timer. And nothing's happened. Actually, it's frozen. So I've got a small bug here. Hopefully I can fix it. Oh, looks like my computer program freezes. And I actually forgot my previous lesson. In order to stop it from freezing, I should add an application.doEvents. Into my loop. Sorry, that's not the right spot. So at the bottom of my loop, I'm going to write application.doEvents. So I'm going to click on my timer. And there it is. I'm just curious to know if it is running correctly. Looks reasonably accurate. I can't really say without an actual stopwatch. Okay, and so there it is. It's counting once every second. I'm going to modify my program now just a little bit to allow it to exit. And what I'm going to do is very similar to with my previous example. I'm going to add a state variable that can be used with my Boolean expression or my loop condition to shut down my program or stop counting if the user presses a key. So here it is, my state variable. So bool keep running, and at first it's going to equal false. when the user clicks on the start button or the LBL start label, I'd like to set keep running equal to true. And now I'm going to change my loop condition so that's no longer an infinite loop. It's going to stop when the user presses a key. So I'm going to run while keep running is equal to true. Now where do I set keep running to equal false? And just like in the previous example, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on my form in the design view, click on the little lightning bolt, look for the key down event, double click, and I'm going to add in the one line of code, keep running equals false. Okay, so there it is. I've changed up my loop condition so that it only runs if keep running equals true. Keep running equals true if the user, when the user clicks on the start button or the start label, keep running is set to true. Keep running will equal false when the user presses a key. Now this is sort of an interesting system of interactions, because when the user presses the key down, what's going to happen in my program is it's going to get interrupted. It's going to run this one line of code. When I say this, the program gets interrupted, if the program loop is running at any time, because of this application.do events, the user is able to click on any keys or the mouse or anything like that, and the program will respond. And when it responds to those events, well, the only event that I programmed it to handle is the key down event. Okay, and so it sets this keep running to equal false. So when the loop runs and it reaches the Boolean expression again up here, if it ever equals false, it's going to get kicked out, and so the program will stop running. So let's just see that over here. I'm going to start the timer. It's running, it's running, it's running. I'm going to press the space bar, and it stops. Okay, so the loop condition has become false and my program has stopped running. This is very, very useful. We'll see later on in the course, actually in a few lessons, how we can use this to help make a game that runs at a relatively consistent frame rate as opposed to using the timer, which we did in previous assignments. There's one little modification I'd like to make in my program, and that is to add a constant. You can see here that I use the literal number 1000 in my if statement. What I'd like to do here is I'd actually like to add a constant that will allow me to more easily change the frame time. So I'm going to set it to equal 1000, and that is going to store the amount of time needed in order for the label to get updated. Okay, so I've created my constant frame time, and so instead of writing time difference greater than or equal to 1000, I'm going to write greater than or equal to frame time. Okay, just a little thing to add to my code that helps make it more readable, helps to make it more expandable and more easily changeable later if I decide that I want it to not count up every second, but maybe count up every tenth of a second. And so that small change in a very easy to find place allows my program to count up much, much quicker.